All right, welcome back into Live Now. I'm Austin Westfall. Lots and lots of national security stories to cover this weekend. Take a look. This is a scoop from Axios. They say that President Trump and Secretary of State Marco Rubio have orchestrated a vast restructuring of the National Security Council, reducing its size and transferring many of its powers to the state and defense departments. A White House official told the news outlet that the reorganization is Trump and Rubio's latest move against what they see as Washington's deep state. Retired Marine Intelligence Officer and host of the Strat podcast, Hal Kempfer, is here. As always, Hal, good to have you in. Let's start off with the most basic thing possible here. What's the deep state? What do they mean by that?
Well, the deep state is kind of a political, I don't know if you want to say philosophy or whatever. It's this entrenched bureaucracy that is not responsive to the people, if you will, not responsive to anybody but themselves. That's what they mean by the deep state. And with that, over the last, I want to say 30, 40 years, 50 years, there's always been this idea that there's this kind of secret agenda by these, permanent public figures, government officials that do things on behalf of themselves, and they control intelligence. They do a lot of other things. Of course, a lot of conspiracy stuff, and you can just pick a conspiracy and throw it at the deep state. That's been going on. What I will say is that certainly President Trump feels that he has been the victim of entrenched federal officials that have said things and done things without any repercussions to them at the time. And certainly part of it is too, and if you look at this, there was a feeling that this thing got really out of hand after 9/11, and with the war on terror, not only all the things about illegal spying and stuff like that, all these various different programs that were alleged, or well, in some cases there were actual programs that were doing some stuff that brought a lot of questions. But the other thing was that the feeling was that this national security construct had been led astray to the point that we justify going into Iraq. And I will tell you, there's a lot of those who are like myself, veterans of Iraq, a lot of folks in national security that kind of question the justification for why we had to go into Iraq, why we had to take Baghdad. The term WMD has kind of taken a different political hue, if you will, just because of how it was used to justify Iraq. That's part of it. And part of it is they're looking at the National Security Council and they're saying, okay, this is kind of a deep state. And the truth is, National Security Council seems to have only done one thing since its inception, I think under the Eisenhower administration, which is grow and grow and grow. It keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. It was originally a small group in the White House, in the West Wing, and it just seemed to grow and get bigger. And for the various departments, Department of Defense, Department of State, and to some extent CIA, some of the others, the feeling was that you're dealing with a separate bureaucracy that was blocking or filtering or doing whatever your feedback or whatever your intelligence or whatever you're saying to the president. It was going into this national security construct and going into a different route. And that was very frustrating for those working at Defense Intelligence Agency, CIA, over at state and elsewhere. There did seem to be something over there that kind of buffered what you were saying before it gets to the president.
So just reading from the reporting from Axios, they say they're aiming to reduce the NSC's size. They want to transfer many of their powers to the state and defense departments. Is it possible to stretch some of these departments thin if they put some of these responsibilities into these departments? Is that a concern here, or do you feel like that's something that they can handle?
I hate to sound like a lawyer, and I'm not, but I feel like the phrase, it depends, is the only way I can describe it. It depends on how they do it. You could take somebody who was working at the White House with NSC, and you could transfer them, say, for example, if they're working on a certain topic or a certain region of the world, whatever, you could transfer them to back to their home agency, for example. A lot of the NSC staffers are loaned out, if you will, from the military, from CIA, from state, from elsewhere, and they go over and work in the NSC. And some of them stay there for a very long time. And you could bring them back. If they do that, if they streamline it, theoretically speaking, For example, DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency. I used to run an intelligence activity under Defense Intelligence Agency. CIA, NSA, others. And by the way, when I say DIA, NSA, a lot of these other intelligence agencies are actually under the Department of Defense. 80% of the intelligence community is actually under the Department of Defense. They could filter, they could send their stuff up, and there wouldn't be this larger bureaucracy that they would have to work with. There would be a more streamlined bureaucracy, and potentially you could get those assessments, analysis, whatever, to the president faster than how it's done now, theoretically speaking. Now, the fear is that you just shed all those individuals, they go back to their home departments, they're working on something completely different, and you've lost that capability. So that would be the fear. And obviously you've heard that articulated. The concern is that they're just getting rid of this, national security construct that serves the president and simply trimming it down and not replacing it with something else.
In your time following these agencies, does it feel like there is fat to trim? Has it felt that way in the past, at least?
Oh, always. Yeah. I mean, look, if you can't work in government for a decade or two or whatever without feeling that there is a lot of layers, all right, that and a lot of them seem to be redundant layers. You're not quite sure why they're there. And I mean, you always know the official reason why they're there, but you kind of look at it and you scratch your head and say, I'm not sure if they're helping things or hindering things in terms of what they do. So there is a legitimate discussion there. In fact, I don't know of anybody, maybe somebody, but I don't know of anybody in government, and certainly lots of people outside of government, but anybody in government who doesn't think there is a lot of redundancy, that there is some waste, occasionally there's some fraud, certainly some abuse that needs to be trimmed out and dealt with. And I think everyone would agree with that. The question is, and it's always the big question is, who and what do you want to trim? And if you're in one of those positions that they're looking at trimming, you have all sorts of reasons why that's a really bad idea. All right. So, yeah, there is, but it deals with what do you want government to do? What do you want government to provide? And when you take stuff out and there's no alternative, well, then that is, eliminating a capability as opposed to streamlining or making a capability more efficient.
So there's still going to be more to learn about how they execute this. What are your big questions about how they execute this? And I guess my question for you would be, what in particular are you looking at? Are there any parts of these agencies that you're looking at to see how they might get tinkered with?
Well, as far as the NSC itself, what I would look at is, okay, the individuals involved, where are you sending them? And the positions or whatever they were doing, where does that function get transferred to? And this could cause, for example, it could be a real headache. One thing the NSC does is it works for the National Security Advisor. It provides a clear, coherent picture of whatever it is that's out there. And one of the ideas of having a larger NSC is that it can kind of filter out some of the interdepartmental, if you will, competition or interagency competition and provide a more holistic view to the president of the United States. Okay, that's just one view of the NSC. All right. Now, with that said, I would look at where they're getting transferred. And the question would be, where are they going? Who will those individuals be working for? Will it be the same individuals or somebody else will come in to fill that job who's not that familiar with that job? What are their marching orders in terms of what they do? It really gets into minutia of what it is. And then the big issue will be, could this actually cause greater interagency friction, greater interagency, interdepartmental friction and competition in the name of streamlining it? And that's very possible. And, for those of us, I wasn't in the military for long before the Goldwater-Nichols Act, which basically got everything working jointly, the joint services all working in a joint construct. But if you go back to, literally through World War II and before, the different services worked in distinct competition with each other, very, very strong competition with each other. And same thing on the interdepartmental side. And frankly, right now, For example, the NSC also works in the Homeland Security sphere. That's part of what they do. Sorting out the interagency, interdepartmental friction, and to some extent confusion between which agency does what between Department of Justice and Department of Homeland Security, with the various different plethora of agencies involved or plethora of organizations. There are so many overlapping concurrent jurisdictions that I've been doing this for decades, and still to this day, I have to constantly go back and get it sorted out, because you will frequently have two different agencies that claim that they do the exact same thing. That's going to cause problems if that sort of competition or whatever becomes part of the assessment process that goes to the president. That's one of the reasons for saying we need a larger NSC, or we need to keep the same size NSC rather than a smaller NSC. The other side, though, is what I talked about earlier, which is kind of streamlining. And if I'm sitting in the department, if I'm sitting in the Defense Intelligence Agency and I'm working on a particular project, I don't want some staffer at the NSC taking all my hard work who doesn't really understand it as well as I do, and then somehow twisting and contorting it around to translate to the president, because they may actually push something forward which is very different than what I want the president to hear.
Yeah.
So that would be a problem.
Hal, we have a lot to talk about today. We are going to take a quick commercial break. There's lots more to get to. We'll be right back with Hal.